What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about the October crisis. So, to be completely honest, I have never heard of this before. But apparently, this was a pretty significant Canadian historical event. And that's all I really know about this. So let's take a look. This is the October Crisis.
What's the name of the first country that comes to mind when I say domestic terrorism, political kidnappings, military occupation, and murder? It's probably not Canada.
What? 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 Huh? What? What? I'm sorry. I don't. I need to stop saying what. But seriously, what's going on here? I've never heard of this before. That's for sure. Military occupation? Domestic terrorism, my God. Political kidnappings and murder. You know, this sounds pretty insane. You would have thought that even us Americans would have heard about this one. When did this happen? October, I guess. That's all I have to go on. The October crisis. What a crisis it was. What? What kind of intro is this? This is crazy. Okay.
Although that's exactly what happened in the fall of 1970 and events that would later become known as the October Crisis.
1970. Only, 50 years ago. So there's many, many Canadians alive today. You experienced this October crisis. Is this something you learn about in, your Canadian school, in history class, or how big was this? Because this sounds big.
Between 1963 and 1970, a militant Quebec independence movement known as the Front de Libération de Québec, or the FLQ, were responsible for over 200 bombings in an...
What? What? Oh my God. Yeah, I've never learned about this side of Canadian history. This was in Quebec. What did they refer to this group as?
Or the FLQ.
The FLQ. What is the FLQ?
Crisis. Between 1963 and 1970, a militant Quebec independence movement.
Oh, it's a Quebec independence movement. Right, because I know enough that Quebec has voted on independence twice, right? But didn't end up leaving Canada and becoming its own nation. So I know, Quebec has had these, considerations of independence. This sounds way more extreme, to say the least. This is this narrator is referring to it, not my words, but as a militant, aggressive, independence movement in Quebec called the FLQ. And, I don't think I'm being too harsh here because they were responsible for over 200 bombings? What does that look like? What does that specifically mean?
Known as the Front de Libération de Québec, or the FLQ, were responsible for over 200 bombings.
Who were you bombing? Who was getting bombed? And when you use the word bomb, when you look at this picture here, this little graphic, those are fires. Bad, but not what I think of when I think of a bomb, that's something that can blow up a building, So what is 200 bombings? What is that actually, what actually happened? Oh my God.
In an attempt to liberate Quebec from English colonialism and capitalism. In just one example, in February 1969, one of the FLQ's bombs exploded at the Montreal Stock Exchange, injuring at least 27 people, and the man responsible, Pierre-Paul Geoffroy, got...
What? What the heck is happening? My mind is blown right now. I had no idea this was a thing. And it's not like it happened 100 or 200 years ago. This is only like 50 years ago. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. For for Canadians, this is old news. And some of you lived through this. But as an American, hearing this for the first time, especially since, we have an idea in our mind of Canada, like, polite, peaceful, respectful people. The banks are being bombed. Now, obviously, this was only this doesn't reflect Canada, really. It doesn't even reflect Quebec as a whole. This was a specific group within Quebec. I'm sure most people in Quebec weren't in favor of bombing buildings. I'm gonna assume that much, but holy cow, the fact that this actually happened, that's not just blowing up the bank, that's blowing my mind.
One of the FLQ's bombs exploded at the Montreal Stock Exchange, injuring at least 27 people, and the man responsible, Pierre-Paul Geoffroy, got 124 life sentences for his crime.
Yeah.
By 1969, the FLQ were split into two different Montreal-based factions, and they turned their focus from bombings to kidnappings.
What is going on? What is happening? Oh my gosh, I get it. If Quebec wanted to, think about considering independence, maybe a little movement, you guys voted on it, that's all fine and dandy if it's, done peacefully. But this is, I got to be honest here. This group, this independence group in Quebec, were this is kind of insane. Like, it is bombing buildings, kidnapping people. Like, what was going on during this time? Seriously.
On October 5th, 1970, they took British Trade Commissioner James Cross from his home, and within 2 weeks, the other faction kidnapped Quebec Deputy Premier and Minister of Labour, Pierre Laporte.
Oh my gosh. I cannot believe this is a real thing that happened. And the question that keeps popping into my mind is, to what end? What I think the narrator briefly touched on, it was to fight against English colonialism, something like that. I understand Quebec is very much like its own culture, French-Canadian culture, and it's very specific, very unique, and you should protect that and cherish that. But why do you have to bomb and kidnap people to accomplish these goals? I'm not connecting those dots. Maybe someone can explain that to me, but why is all this violence necessary? Can't Quebec just vote to become independent, or what's all this violence going to achieve?
After Laporte was kidnapped, elected officials were terrified that they were next,
Yeah.
and both the Quebec Premier and Montreal Mayor asked for help from the federal government.
Yeah.
On October 16th, the Premier of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, responded by deploying the military and invoking
The Premier of Canada? Did they mean the Prime Minister of Canada? The Prime Minister? What the heck is a premier? I don't even know what that is. Sounds very fancy. Anyway, that distracted me. Okay.
Premier of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, responded by deploying the military and invoking the War Measures Act,
Wow.
which basically stripped Canadians of their legal rights from police investigation, the only time it's been applied during peacetime in Canadian history.
Whoa. Wow, this was a very, very touchy situation. So they actually had to increase the reach of the Canadian police, where they were allowed to just investigate people basically without any kind of restriction, which is, of course, very dangerous. To give, any government or police that much power to just investigate people without any rhyme or reason or cause. But this was the only time that happened, and it's because of the absolute chaos that was happening, I suppose.
After that, on October 17th, more than 250 people were arrested, and that day,
Wow.
they found Pierre Laporte's strangled body in the trunk of a car.
Wait. Who is Pierre Laporte? Which one was Pierre Laporte? Hold on, this is very important. That's one of the people that was kidnapped? I gotta go back and figure this out. That's the guy who bombed. Where's the kidnap? Here.
Commissioner James Cross from
No, that was James Cross. Oh, here we go. Pierre Laporte.
his home, and within 2 weeks, the other faction kidnapped Quebec Deputy Premier and Minister of Labour, Pierre Laporte.
The Quebec Deputy what? And Premier. Anyway, the titles might escape me right now, but they actually strangled him to death. Oh my god. That is incredibly sad.
In the trunk of
Okay. And found him in the trunk of a car. Oh my god.
were arrested, and that day they found Pierre Laporte's strangled body in the trunk of a car. By the 20th of October, warrants were issued for the leaders of the FLQ, and
This is scary. Like, I'm sure for other Canadians and Quebecois living in Quebec who didn't, like, agree with all this. Maybe you agreed with, like, the independence movement, or maybe you didn't, but the violence and the murder, I'm sure there's a lot of people in Quebec who are like, oh my god, this is terrifying. And I'm sure a lot of people around Canada were shocked and terrified. I'm shocked and terrified just hearing about this 50 years later. Oh my.
1,628 raids were conducted under the War Measures Act. Finally, after being held in an apartment for 59 days,
Wow.
James Cross's release was negotiated in exchange for safe passage of his kidnappers to Cuba.
His kidnappers just fled the country and went to Cuba.
The members of the FLQ that were caught received various sentences ranging from 8 years to life for murdering and kidnapping.
Yeah.
Eventually, all of the members who fled Canada returned from Cuba and were arrested and received sentences that were, for the most part, the duration of 2 years in jail and probation.
2 years. You get to go on a vacation in Cuba, come back, and you get only 2 years for kidnapping a government official. That's not too harsh, to be honest.
The Canadian federal response to the kidnappings was extremely controversial, and out of 497 people arrested, only 62 were charged.
Oh, so there was some controversy. I was sensing that a little bit with these wartime measures they had to invoke during a time of not war, but it was almost like a mini, I don't know, not quite a war in Canada, but I don't know, domestic terrorism for sure. Kidnapping, murder, bombings. Seriously. That's some scary stuff. But some Canadians were not happy with how the government handled it. It sounds like they kind of overreacted, arrested like 1,000 people, or 600, and only convicted like 60. So, I don't know. I can imagine it would be quite hard if you're the person who's tasked with, finding a way to control this situation and bring it to an end. That's a really difficult spot to be in.
Certain tactics were deemed illegal by the Macdonald Commission, which led to the creation of the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, separate from the RCMP. The War Measures Act was repealed in 1988 and replaced by the Emergencies Act, with limited and specific powers for the government to deal with security emergencies that were subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights.
Wow. Is that the end? Wow. So this incident actually caused for a bit of reform to happen in the Canadian government, which I think is warranted, but I don't know. I've never heard anything quite like this situation. So this was a unique situation in Canada where they basically responded a little overboard, but I'm still shocked by this story. Shocked. The October crisis. What a crisis it was. Crisis doesn't even quite encapsulate what this was. This was like terrorism. Like scary, scary stuff. All in the name of the Quebec independence, basically. Is a group that that was fighting for Quebec independence. I'm still not exactly clear about what they were trying to accomplish with the bombings and the kidnappings. What what was that going to do? They were trying to get the federal government to grant them independence? Cuz that's the thing that's kind of missing from this explanation for me. Not that I condone murder and violence or any of this. I don't, but I just want to know what they were thinking. Why were they doing it? What did they think they were what did they want to get out of it? What did they think was going to happen when they kidnapped these government officials? What did they ask for? That never really got answered. But other than that, this was a really interesting video, really interesting topic. Kind of a tragedy, really. Scary. I'll never look at Canada the same after this. But seriously, this is a dark time in Canadian history, and sometimes you gotta talk about it, learn from it. And for me, that's kind of what this was today. So I did enjoy it for those reasons. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on the October crisis. If you think my understanding is correct, if you think there's some context that I missed, or that'd be fascinating to hear about, especially if you're Canadian. You probably know more about this than I do. But anyway, if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and learning about Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.